On this Tuesday night, access denied. The Taliban blocks Afghans from going to the Kabul airport as video emerges of Afghans outside the airport pleading with Canadian soldiers.
We have documents, we have visas, nobody's touching us.
Could Canada stay beyond the August 31st deadline? The pressure on President Biden. Plus, did the head of the CIA meet the Taliban leader? Political popularity grading the Liberal strategy to try to win a majority. Return of the masks. The province is mandating people to cover up again as COVID cases climb.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
After days of chaos at Kabul airport, another sign not all Afghans desperate to flee the Taliban will make it out. The Taliban now says it will still allow foreigners to leave, but will no longer allow Afghans to go to the airport. Thousands of vulnerable people, including those who risk their lives working for the Canadian military, may be left behind, and the August 31st deadline is looming. Good evening and thanks for joining us. President Joe Biden said today he intends to stick to that deadline. Evacuation flights are more rapid now. The U.S. and its allies have airlifted out more than 21,000 people in the last 24 hours. The Canadian government says more than 2,000 people have been brought to Canada in recent weeks. And tonight the government released this photo showing what it says is another 500 people who left Kabul yesterday. It's not clear how many on board this flight are Canadians and how many are Afghan citizens. And this video was taken outside Kabul airport, obtained by Global News. It's the first images of Canadian Special Forces on the ground operating in the crowds of Afghans hoping to board flights. Some of the Afghans worked as interpreters and say they have visas and papers but are being ignored by the Canadian soldiers.
We are telling them here is our visas, we have documents, we have visas, nobody's touching us.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was pressed today about making good on his promise to bring more than 20,000 Afghans to Canada. He said Canada may stay in Kabul past the August 31st deadline, if possible, to keep evacuations going.
I emphasize that Canada is ready to stay beyond the 31st deadline if it's at all possible, because we want to save as many people as possible, and Canadians are ready to work to try and do that.
The Prime Minister joined Western leaders in a G7 emergency meeting about Afghanistan today, all of them grappling with the urgency of the evacuation and what happens next under Taliban rule. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
Lives squeezed into a wheelbarrow with a deadline fast approaching. Throngs of people remain outside Kabul airport despite the urgent evacuation efforts of the past week. Canada picked up 500 people Monday. More than 70,000 people have been flown out so far, the vast majority by the US. Countries like the UK, France and Germany say there is not enough time left to fly out everyone they want by the August 31st deadline. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson convened a G7 leaders meeting Tuesday with the goal of convincing US President Joe Biden to push back the deadline. Johnson failed, Biden not bending, for now. So Johnson is urging the Taliban to allow an extension for other nations and to respect human rights amid reports of violations.
They include, among others, summary executions of civilians and all the combat members of the Afghan National Security Forces. Restrictions on the right of women.
Afghanistan can't lurch back into becoming a breeding ground of terror. Afghanistan can't become a narco state. Girls have got to be educated up to the age of 18.
Offering the carrot of economic engagement in the future.
Because the G7 has very considerable leverage, economic, diplomatic, and political.
Earlier, a Taliban spokesperson repeated the group's demand that the August 31st deadline be met, now blocking Afghan nationals from going to the airport. The Taliban made a similar demand 2 weeks before the previous deadline earlier this year, but crucially that was before Taliban forces took control of Kabul. There may be a split within the G7 over the departure deadline, but in a joint statement, the group said the Taliban will be held accountable for its actions. However, with China, Russia and other regional powers also potentially looking to get involved in Afghanistan's future, that economic leverage of the G7 may not be as strong as Prime Minister Johnson would hope. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Many Canadians are working to help get Afghans who worked with our soldiers as interpreters and guides out of the country. Staying behind almost certainly condemns them to death at the hands of the Taliban. Some have made it out, but as Mike Armstrong reports, others are still pleading for help from Canadian soldiers who are now outside Kabul's airport.
These are the only images we've seen of Canadian troops on the ground in Afghanistan. It was shared with Global News by a veterans group working to get Afghan interpreters out of the country and was, according to that group, shot by an Afghan interpreter.
Here are Canadian forces over there. We came here since 6 a.m. morning. We are waiting here. No Canadian forces is hearing our voice.
This is a rush against time.
Retired General David Fraser is part of the veterans group. He says they've been able to get visas for about 15% of the families they're trying to help. That leaves 85% still stuck. So far, how many have gotten out? Only 3%.
It's gotten better, but it's not good enough. We've still got people on the ground that need to get out.
Global News spoke to one of those former interpreters. We're protecting his identity. He says he has visas to go to Canada for himself and his wife, but not for his children. They have 6.
I can't live without the children. And where should I leave them to? I mean, there's no place, there's no one right here in Afghanistan.
The interpreter says he's been to the airport twice with his family, and both times hasn't seen Canadian soldiers or officials. He can't keep going back because it's too dangerous. They have to go through Taliban checkpoints.
They were hitting the people, they were tearing the documents, and I couldn't able to show them any these kind of documents like I worked with a Canadian.
Now, reaching the airport is becoming harder and harder. The Taliban has promised safe passage to people trying to leave by plane, but there are more and more reports of beatings at checkpoints and people being turned around. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Without American support, the evacuation mission would collapse, and U.S. President Joe Biden is still sticking to the August 31st deadline, a deadline his administration negotiated with the Taliban. Biden is projecting calm when the world can see the chaotic, desperate scenes at the airport. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow is with me. Jackson, the Biden administration has been negotiating with the Taliban for a long time now, and now the head of the CIA has gone to Kabul?
That's right, Donna. You know, this curious development actually unfolded yesterday, a secret meeting in Kabul between the CIA director and the de facto leader of the Taliban. It's the highest level meeting involving the U.S. and the Taliban since the militant group seized control of Afghanistan. U.S. officials are framing these talks as being operational and tactical, centered around the continued efforts to evacuate U.S. citizens and allied Afghans. The CIA director, though, is an interesting choice as chief negotiator here, given the long and complex history between the CIA and Taliban, and given that the Taliban leader was actually captured and imprisoned as a result of a CIA operation years ago. But the White House insists they need the cooperation of the militant group to finish the airlift by August 31st, and they admit they are making contingency plans just in case they can't meet that deadline.
The Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation. We're already had some gunfighting break out. We run a serious risk of it breaking down as time goes on.
Jackson, this is the biggest foreign policy challenge of Biden's presidency. He promised an orderly withdrawal. It's been anything but. So how much is this affecting Biden's image and reputation?
Well, for the first time in his young presidency, he's actually underwater in his approval ratings. Just 41% approve of the job he's doing as president, 55% now disapprove, and it really is his handling of the Afghanistan situation that's dragging him down here. Just 26% of Americans say they approve of the job he's doing handling that file, even though a majority of Americans, in principle, support the idea of withdrawing U.S. forces from Afghanistan. We should point out that to date, 77,000 people have been airlifted out of that country, and tonight U.S. troops are slowly starting their drawdown in anticipation of leaving ahead of that looming deadline.
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Now to the federal election here in Canada. We are into week 2 of the campaign, and though the first week is usually long forgotten by voting day, it is worth taking stock of where things stand, which leader has momentum right now, and what issues have thrown campaigns off topic. Mercedes Stevenson is in Hamilton, Ontario, traveling with the Liberal campaign.
Donna, for the Liberals, things have not been going according to plan in the early days of the campaign. The deteriorating situation in Afghanistan has followed the Liberal leader from coast to coast. And here today in Hamilton, he was asked whether he can balance his attention on a foreign policy crisis as well as a political campaign where winning is all or nothing.
Canadians across the country are thinking about, yes, Afghanistan, but they're also thinking about how they're going to get through this pandemic, how their kids are going to get back to school when they're not vaccinated and stay safe.
Afghanistan isn't the only timing issue for the Liberal leader. The optics of calling an election in the middle of a fourth wave of COVID-19 have continued to follow him. And while the Liberals want to frame this as an election about big ideas, so far the party has been short on them. And the Liberal leader has not committed to releasing the party's platform before the debate. And the sunny ways of years past has this time been punctuated with edited videos of his main rival, wedge issues like mandatory vaccines, and even attacks on provincial political rivals, including a threat to claw back healthcare dollars from Saskatchewan over private MRI clinics. So far, the strategy isn't playing well. The Liberals have squandered the 5-point lead they held over the Conservatives heading into the election. A new poll from Ipsos suggests the Conservatives and Liberals are now statistically tied. The poll also found Justin Trudeau's popularity is down, with his approval rating dipping below 50% for the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ipsos found 33% of voters would support the Liberals if the election were held tomorrow. That's down 3 points from last week, while the Conservatives went up a point to 32% of the vote. Discussions in political circles have shifted from a majority to the possibility of another minority. And while there are just a few weeks left in the campaign and Justin Trudeau has shown himself to be a strong campaigner and anything could change, he may need more than his record and his current promises to win over voters. Donna?
Mercedes, thanks. The Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, is promising to protect employee pension plans to ensure the money deducted from paychecks will be there when people retire. If elected, he says his party will change the law to prevent what he calls corporate elites from giving themselves perks when their companies are in financial trouble and workers' pensions are at risk.
We will prevent executives from paying themselves large bonuses while managing a company going through restructuring if the pension isn't properly funded.
And today, the NDP focused on long-term care. We'll have more on its plan to end for-profit care homes a little bit later. First, to the pandemic. The Manitoba government says all frontline provincial employees who work with vulnerable people are required to be fully vaccinated by October 31st or undergo regular testing. That includes healthcare providers and teachers. Premier Brian Pallister says the public health orders will help protect children who cannot be vaccinated, avoid another lockdown, and stave off a dangerous fourth wave in Manitoba. He is also bringing back the provincial mask mandate for all indoor public spaces. BC is as well. That province's top doctor says starting tomorrow, masks will be required for people 12 and older in places like grocery stores, malls, restaurants, and public transit. Dr. Bonnie Henry says BC's case count has been creeping up. The province also revealed its back-to-school plan. Students will return to full-time in-person learning, sports, music, and other extracurricular activities. There will be no cohorts. Masks will still be required for students in grades 4 to 12. They will also be mandatory for kindergarten to grade 12 staff and visitors to schools.
The most important thing we can do to protect children who are not yet eligible for vaccines, and we do hope there will be vaccines, particularly for the 6 to 12 year age group by sometime this fall, But the most important thing we can do to protect them is to make sure that the adults around them are immunized.
There's still no requirement for teachers in BC to be vaccinated, but vaccination will be required in many places on post-secondary campuses, including gyms, restaurants, and sporting events. And those living in on-campus housing will also require proof of vaccination. In Quebec, the new school year begins this week for some students, and today that province announced those in grade 1 and older will have to wear masks inside the classroom in 9 regions of the province, including Montreal. Students in the other regions will be required to wear masks in school common areas and on buses. The government says it's to help avoid closures and online learning because of the surge of the Delta variant. With cases rising, Quebec is pushing ahead with its vaccine passport system. It comes into effect September 1st. Proof of vaccination will be required for people aged 13 and older to access non-essential services like restaurants, movie theaters, and gyms. It will not be needed for retail stores.
2 Mobiles app will be available for download on Apple from 8 morning tomorrow and soon on Google. I think it's a matter of a day or 2 maximum.
Quebec was the first province to announce the vaccine passport as a way to prevent lockdowns as cases surge. And one more pandemic note, the Northwest Territories has confirmed its first death related to COVID-19. The chief public health officer there says a resident died late last night. The territory is experiencing its worst outbreak since the pandemic began. There are now 219 active cases. A pitch to fix Canada's long-term care homes. Coming up, the NDP's proposal to protect the most vulnerable. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh used a campaign stop at a long-term care facility in Ontario to make the case for an end to profit-making long-term care homes. More than 14,000 residents in care homes died in the first and second waves of the pandemic, and all the major parties have substantial policy proposals to better protect those living in long-term care. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, takes a closer look.
The pandemic data has been crystal clear. The vast majority of COVID-19 deaths in Canada were in long-term care homes. And those in long-term care homes operated for profit were sick and died at a much higher rate than those in non-profit homes.
You know, the research is quite clear. Overwhelmingly, not-for-profit has provided a better quality of care than for-profit homes.
That's why the NDP is pushing a ban on the practice of running long-term care homes for profit.
We've said really clearly, it is wrong that for-profit exists in this system. That there should be no profit that puts people as a less priority than profits and money.
Maureen McDermott's 91-year-old mother died of COVID in a for-profit long-term care facility.
The stories are horrendous. Profits do not belong inside of long-term care, and in fact, profits kill seniors.
Singh and McDermott push for the ban while standing outside of the corporate headquarters of Revera. That's a private, for-profit LTC operator, controlled coincidentally by the Federal Public Sector Pension Investment Board, a Crown corporation.
Out of all private for-profit long-term care operators, they actually have the highest number of deaths in Canada. Over 860 deaths across 56 facilities.
Neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives agree with a ban on for-profit LTC facilities, but each party has made substantial commitments on long-term care. The Conservatives would have set aside $3 billion for upgrades and repairs to long-term care homes and have promised to, quote, encourage non-profit operators. The Liberals are promising to spend $9 billion on long-term care, establish a minimum wage of $25 an hour for personal support workers, and hire 50,000 more of them. And so, for the first time in a federal election, taking care of people in long-term care homes is a major campaign issue. And advocates are hoping that after all this election talk, there's some action when the vote is done. Donna?
Well, everybody hoping for that. David Aiken in Mississauga, thanks. Ahead, record-breaking wildfires scorch California. crews are racing to prevent an explosive wildfire from getting any closer to California's popular Lake Tahoe region. The Calder fire has blazed through more than 42,000 hectares in just 9 days and incinerated at least 500 homes and other structures. Wildfires in California have now scorched more land than at this point in last year's record-setting fire season. With climate change making conditions hotter and drier, experts warn California may not see any relief until December. New York State has a new governor.
The Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully...
That's Kathy Hochul. She was sworn in during a private ceremony at the state capitol. The 62-year-old Democrat and former congresswoman from Buffalo says she wants people to believe in their government again. She takes the reins after Andrew Cuomo resigned rather than face a likely impeachment. An independent investigation led by the state's attorney general found there was credible evidence Cuomo sexually harassed at least 11 women. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with Team Canada marching on the world stage at the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Paralympics. The flag bearer for Canada was Priscilla Gagne. She's a medal contender in judo. 128 Canadian athletes are competing. Good luck to all of them. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.